going to start off with the big questions, things that are really important to people. You are 37 years old. What the fuck is your skincare routine?
Man, 39,
That's insane.
39,
That's insane. You're
knocking
2 years apart.
knocking on 40, bro.
Oh my God.
Yeah, man. Cold water, and shouts out to Mom Dukes. It's
That's
really Mom Dukes.
that's cold
It's
water.
really
That's
Mom
what I
Dukes.
remember. I remember this very clearly when Pharrell was asked.
He was right. He's right. He's right.
He said cold water too.
Yeah, he's right. Cold water
Okay, you hear that.
closes up your pores. But yeah, man, 39, about to be 40
And
this
you're a new
time next
father.
year. And I'm a new father, man. Yeah. Yeah,
Congratulations.
man.
What's family life right now? How do you do studio, father, all of the things?
Uh to be honest, it's not much studio.
Mm.
It's just really wifey, Noah, supporting her. She's still, getting back to 100%. And so I'm just support right now. I'm the cavalry
Yeah, you're
at the
keeping it
house.
down.
So I fit in, drawing, some reading when I can, but for the most part, I'm waking up, what do you need? What you need help with? What does Noah need? You need a break. I'm just support, at this point. So
That's good.
but the time away is gonna it's gonna help the practice process,
Yeah,
I'm
I think
sure.
it always fuels it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
even if you're not in the studio, other things are happening and you
yes.
just brought life into the world, so like how could that not
Yeah,
affect, well, I mean, your lovely wife brought life into the world. When I was thinking about you having a kid and just like what that means for the studio practice, but also what that means for how you share your spiritual practice
mhm,
with, the next generation, with your kin, like
yeah,
how that's meant a lot to you.
uh-huh.
Does that mean is church a part of your life or is it a different kind of spiritual practice? How are you going to pass this on?
Grew up with my grandma going to the church. You not better not miss church on Sunday. That was how I grew up, but obviously as we grow and become adults, you start seeking after things on your own, and so I'm
Mhm.
just in big research mode right now. I'm just doing a lot of reading,
Uh-huh.
a lot of research, and things that feel true I do, and things that don't, I stray away from. But I'm in big, learning, research, discovery mode. Lots of conversations with my pops, my mom.
And they're open to those kind of conversations cuz like I know for myself like
Mhm.
I thought so my parents are from Kerala
Uh-huh.
and huge Christian population there, so I grew up Christian
Okay.
and they're very religious
Yeah.
and I thought learning about theology and the history of Christianity and all that stuff
Yeah.
like it would build a bridge.
Uh-huh.
It did not. It was like it created more hostility in a way because it's like, why do you have all these questions? Why are you
Yeah.
why are you inquiring? Just like you believe.
Yeah.
What is that? What are the bridges that you have with your folks?
I think so. My dad, he went to theology school to become a pastor
Oh wow.
at a certain point. And he's done a lot of research and reading and so forth in his, in his own life. And so when I come to him with questions, he's very open arms about answering those questions, guiding me, with the questions. Sometimes, parents can be very opinionated. That's not what that's what we should be looking at. It's this. So,
Yeah.
but it's great because I think in terms of spirituality or, for me, I just want to get to the truth.
Yeah.
That's what it's really about. And I
Yeah.
think um through becoming an artist, you know, art has is a thing that deals with truth. So once I made the decision to actually become an artist, it made me question a lot of things about, who I am, where I come from, you know what I'm saying? What do I believe? These things. And so I started to become a student of history,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
really just started to do a lot of reading. And then again, going back to my folks, asking questions. Did you hear about this? What do you think about this? And so,
That's beautiful. It's
yeah,
nice that you have that relationship with your family.
yeah.
I mean, it seems like they're all kind of artists in their own way too.
Yeah, my dad, I guess I guess I'll call him like an artist, graphic designer.
Mhm.
Growing up, I seen him do a lot of things with typography, not really painting, more so graphics. He did t-shirts, which is what led me to being like falling into streetwear, watching him kind of having a brand and
Yeah.
doing his thing
Oh,
and
he had a
doing
brand.
logos. Yeah, I mean, he made shirts.
Okay. Okay.
Pops made shirts. But just seeing him kind of move like that gave me the confidence to want to be a, graphic designer, or want to learn about typography, or want to learn about silk screen and t-shirts.
Mhm.
He was a big part of that.
I wanna start
Yeah.
with limbo first.
Hmm.
This is a quote that, like, hit me really hard just because it's I don't know, it's like it's a heavy thing to say.
Hmm.
You said, "Making that connection between abstraction and faith grabbed hold of me. Suddenly, for me to paint or find an image became symbolic of how one lives life with hopes of dying to then enter into the kingdom of heaven."
Hmm.
That's a heavy ass thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't mean I didn't mean it to be so deep, sound so heavy or whatever. But
Well, what is
yeah, I
the like,
mean,
what is the kingdom of heaven for you? Like, what is
yeah, I
that?
mean, kingdom of heaven is, to have the, I don't know, to be with God, to be with, be with Christ, be with, I mean, yeah, I guess to make it to paradise, I guess,
Mhm,
or spiritual paradise, right? And so I guess how I attested that to painting,
mhm,
when I first came to New York for my second business trip. This is graphic design days. Wasn't concerned about being an abstract painter at all. But I ended up going to the Met, went to the abstract expressionist wing, first time with Cy Twombly, de Kooning, Gilliam, you name it, the guys, right? And so I immediately felt like this is something I want to do,
mhm,
but I don't know how I'm gonna get there. So when I did start to research and read, and I learned about de Kooning and him talking about finding an image, it very much sounded like a painterly way of faith,
yeah,
or how one goes through life, living life. We all try, and, I don't know if people are religious or believe in God or heaven or afterlife or whatever, but we all live life the best we, can, in order to make it to that next place, right? Where our soul will rest, so um he talked about finding an image, and for me, it made that connection for me. So I said, if I'm going to be any type of painter, it would be an abstract painter,
mhm,
because it is the painterly way. It was like a motif, or a painterly motif, that defined faith,
hmm.
or how I saw faith, or how I see faith.
I mean,
Because faith is believing in things unseen, right?
for sure.
And so if you're in the process of making a painting, but you don't necessarily know what that finished image is, but you're working your way through it, that's what that thing is. And so even we all, I mean, I don't know what the kingdom of heaven looks like. It's been described in a few ways, but I hope to get there, so to get to that finished painting, or I don't want to say perfect painting, but the act of making, to find my way to new images, is where what made that connection for me.
Yeah, I mean, it feels I remember I had to write something about Onkwara, like, back in the day, and weirdly, like, after spending more and more time with the work, it felt like it was a practice of prayer, that every painting was a small act of devotion towards something unnameable, and you didn't it didn't have a shape or a way of being described, but, like, you put in the work,
Hmm.
and, like, it felt like, similarly related to, like, thinking about what all this means here for somewhere else,
Yes.
and it feels like that's, like, kind of the starting point for these 12 gates that are in Accra right now.
Hmm.
How did this all come about? Like, first of all, this space is fucking stunning.
Yeah. Shouts out to Limbo, man. That's Dominique, and who curated the show, the homie Diallo. Yeah, I mean, Diallo suggested me to Dominique, who runs the Limbo Museum. Um, Very forward thinking, and just in terms of the vision, but it's a museum that, basically uses abandoned spaces in order to give artists an opportunity to put together shows. And they've started a residency program, and I was the first artist to do the residency. And so, initially, actually, when I went to go visit for the first trip, I thought we were going to actually use the space that they used for the prior presentation when they did the kind of inaugural, um, kind of talk and show that they did. And she was like, "No, I'm just taking you here to just show you what the initial space, but this is the idea that I have for you." And so she
Oh.
went to the University of Ghana, and I was like, "You're gonna let me do a show, and this is what we doing?" And she was like, "Yeah." So I felt um it was great because it was my first time on the continent.
Uh-huh.
I've always wanted to do a show on the continent. My father always talked about taking the family to the continent. Obviously, I want to touch roots.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then also it just was challenging because it was like you've never worked at this scale before.
Sure.
How are you going to treat this space? How's the work going to function in this space? How's it going to reverberate in the space? And myself and Diallo, we had a lot of conversations surrounding that, and he challenged me on a lot of things in terms of, how these gates from their initial intent and how they were shown,
Mhm.
um, how to move past that, and to allow them to do other things. And so this allowed me the space to do so
The first time you showed them were in LA?
in Los Angeles. Yep.
So, I just wanna show images of that exhibition, um, which had a great title, T-1000,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
um,
Yeah,
which
I'm
is
sure everybody's familiar with Terminator. Yeah.
yeah, T2, Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm super big into sci-fi movies that got that kind of post-apocalyptic punk undertone, brutalist kind of futurist,
I mean, it
you know.
shows, like, the work is definitely in that vibe, and, like, I remember I think it was only when I was researching you that I saw this show, but I
Mhm.
do remember when you were fabricating those gates,
Yeah.
and I was, like, checking the progress on Instagram and things, and I was like, "Shit, this is different. This is a new step."
Making new paintings or finding my way through making new types of paintings led me to sculpture. I'm a fan of painting first and art first. So, being interested as a maker, you're always trying to figure out, well, how can I push the work? How can I find myself if I'm interested in sculpture, how do I find my way there? And you know, being introduced to a new material, which is rubber, led me to uh really changing the whole processing way I make work.
Hmm.
That led me to a form that was found by way of the byproducts of the paintings, which gave way to the gates. And so that's the cutting
Right,
that you
right.
see in the rubber, because at one point I was researching and reading a lot about um ready-made sculptures,
Mhm.
and just starting to think about my paintings in the sense of a ready-made, right, and how I can show all parts or all aspects of the painting. And so kind of making this curvature incision, and the shape that was left with when it was laid on the floor in my studio reminded me of the floor plans used for the boats that were used in the transatlantic slave trade.
I That's interesting to hear because I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was like that you had that shape in mind, and then that curvature
Hmm.
got cut, and like it became that act of violence of the in the surface. But it's
Hmm.
interesting to hear that it was first a formal decision, one where it was like, let's get to the truth of
Yes.
these materials.
The thought of even showing the substrate, I think that's why for me, I want to continue to put myself in new situations in the studio,
Hmm.
because for me that's the only way that, and every artist is different, that's the way that I grow.
Sure.
So if the aesthetic of a material interests me, it's for me to not really ask too many questions, just to respond to it. So the body of work before the offerings, I was using a lot of military tent shell halves, and it basically they're called pup tents, and you basically button two of the tent shell halves together
Hmm.
to make a full tent. Well, I was buttoning them together to stretch them over the substrate, but because they don't make a complete closure, you get access to the substrate.
I
And
see.
so I thought, oh, I can be more intentional about that. This is happening by way of accident, or I've been thinking about ready mades. I found this way. I
Right.
made a series of paintings with the pup tents, but I
Mhm.
said, how am I going to be more intentional about this access to revealing the substrate and how it changes, the form and the structure of my work. The reason why I called them gates was because, thinking about that history, along that journey. I mean, we've seen Amistad films and things like this. I was thinking that, how do I take this history and reverberate it into something, uh, you know, I, I don't want to say beautiful, but just change that history,
Yeah.
not change it, but speak further into it.
Yeah, it's like a I don't know, it feels like the history of black culture in so many ways where it's like you take shitty situations, situations that are beyond the pale,
Hmm.
and then you consistently
Yes.
make joy out of it.
Yes. Yes. I
And
think some of the best work is made from the most mundane things. I think that's black and brown folk in general. We take a lot of the waste and you know
cook it up.
repurpose it into something great. And so I thought I said, hey, like where, all those bodies that were lost along that journey.
Mhm.
Where are those souls? Were like where do they lie?
Mhm.
Scriptures say that all souls return to the Father. Once they pass. But I just thought that like maybe I can take this shape and I can reform it as this gate-like sculpture, in order to give way for those souls to pass through, to have rest.
So that early version, that's sheet metal welded together
Mhm.
and it has a structure underneath, but then this becomes airy,
Yeah,
light
yeah,
tubes.
right.
What does that translation mean for you? What does it mean to take it to this place where it is pure structure?
Well, a big part of my, like, work and how I've, like, grown will continue to try and grow is, I'm just paying attention to what interests me. When I used to have a studio out in Ridgewood, and I would look at a lot of the debris, the junk by the trash cans, the way that, the back of semi trucks, how they oxidize over time. Just in the environ on the city, the outside, and using that as a language to bring into the studio.
Mhm.
So I did the same thing when I went to Ghana. Ghana's a very interesting place because it's like it excited me, but it also made me really upset
Mhm.
because you see wealth and poverty
Right next to each other.
right next to each other. So
Yeah.
you go to a hotel that's like around the corner from, literally like, some people don't even have clean water.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so, um,
That feels like Mumbai too. Like I remember going there and there's like Xenia and Prada on one side and then this dude that his hands were disintegrating from leprosy. And I was just like this is so stark. Like where I'm from in the South, it's like it's still communist
yeah.
and like the discrepancy in wealth is like much less extreme, but
Hmm.
there's certain places in various parts of the world where like the jump is so crazy that
No,
it's like it's
it,
really fucks with you.
yeah. And just getting a grasp on like why is this happening, right? So from my understanding of what they were telling me was that when new individuals were elected or coming into power, certain buildings that were like, had paperwork and had, the okay to go forward and build this hotel, build up this certain area, build up this certain advertisements. If that project wasn't complete by the time that that individual who gave way for it to happen wasn't finished, the next person that came into power can have say yay or nay on whether it's
Oh.
finished or not. So you see a lot of, which initially gave Dominique the idea for limbo, because
Right.
you're seeing all these great infrastructures half built,
Huh.
and then the people that are living there have to deal with it. So, you just it's anyway, getting to these kind of the language within the gates here. It was by way of seeing the advertisement signs and just seeing the structure that
Oh,
was
okay.
exposed. You just see, you know, it's funny. I seen Eric. walk in. My bro was goody. I seen him in there, but I was. It's funny. I thought about him a lot because actually a lot of the and I told Dominique, I was like, you reach out to Eric, because but you would see a lot of the structures, but you would see just torn away signages. You went to Ghana actually before in May, and you would see, you know what I'm saying, signages breezing in the wind and stuff like that. And
That's Eric Mack in the back.
so I was just thinking about the structure within my work, the need or the call for or the attention that I was bringing to the structure within my work, and then how can I, you know, show the structure of these gates,
Mhm.
not as this solid form, but as this form that you can kind of your eyes can kind of pass through, and then just thinking about the space that they're about to be exhibited in. It's a very raw,
Skeletal.
skeletal space. So
Yeah.
I want the works to have this like presence, where they're there, but they also evaporate, the
Mhm.
way in which even these sight lines were very important for us, because I was like, hey, I want your eye to rest on the sculpture, but I also want your eye to be able to pass through the structure of the sculptures and just enjoy the space as well too. You have sculpture after sculpture after sculpture that reveals a painting in the distance as well. So that was a big part of um another reason why, I wanted to stick to this thing, and also just thinking about, the radical, you know black empowerment, or that was there, thinking about Nkrumah,
Mhm.
thinking about his influence on W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, all these individuals who I know I look up to, and have read a bit about, and thinking about the writings, that they, and just like the fortitude and the resilience they had, and how maybe these forms, can kind of give way for those like teachings and those hopes for, for the continent, or those from the diaspora, for those to kind of echo throughout these works as well.
I'm not familiar with you said Nkuma?
And Nkrumah,
Nkrumah.
yeah, um, he was a revolutionary that really wanted to unite all of Africa.
Okay.
And while he was living, while he was active, he had a huge influence on a lot of American activists as well. Malcolm
Oh.
X was like somebody he really influenced.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay, I got to do some reading.
and yeah, so I just, those were like, that first trip was very visual, and the latter end was very like, I'm looking, I'm reading, I'm writing, and then the second trip was, going to work.
It's beautiful that you find a vernacular, like the tubing is like the vernacular of the city, and it sits in the space, but it takes you somewhere else, and it's like it's building on all these conversations that you've already been having.
Hmm.
And then it really makes me think how far you've come in this crazy way, where like you started in graphic design and typology and working in streetwear, and like to go from that to this, it's not like it's not insane or anything, but it
Hmm.
also it's like it's a pretty serious distance in terms of like what that work looked like and where you are now. This was just like early graphic design.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense of like Rare Panther, what it is, what that graphic design is, and then your first show. Your
Hmm.
first show is In Search of a Wonderful Place.
Yeah.
Is very obviously condo inspired.
Yeah.
Um
Heavily.
heavily,
Heavily. Yeah.
and you're bringing your own things to it, but it's also like it's within this space of what I've seen a few times over,
Hmm.
of like people who are in streetwear, and the artists that they're interested in are all the same artists, which is
Hmm.
Kondo, Cause,
And
Picasso,
Murakami.
and Murakami.
Hmm.
Oh, also let's not forget Basquiat and Warhol.
Yep.
Like those are the names. Those are the names that all
I've
those
had my
people
moment too.
yeah. And it's we it's an instance in which we get to see an artist like process it live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're doing it in exhibitions, not in the studio. It's
No.
there are people that are figuring their shit out, and like they get their opportunities much later, but like
Right.
one thing that it's a credit to you is like you are always adept at what you were doing,
Hmm.
and so somebody saw like some promise there, and then you kept pushing it forward.
Right.
And so like to go from this to deep gestural abstraction is already a huge jump. Why did you forsake this?
This is when I moved to New York, but prior was that trip to the Met.
Okay.
So I was aware of the Met, but I didn't have the studio time nor the hand and eye coordination to even make a pure gestural abstract painting. But that's why I named this show In Search of a Wonderful Place. I don't know if I'm at the wonderful place now, but you know, this was me making the work that I was interested in at that time,
Mhm.
and but also titling my work in a way in which titling the show saying that like, listen, this is a I could have, yeah, definitely stayed there, but I'm in search of something. I don't know what.
When did this place stop being wonderful?
I mean, it's funny when we were talking the other day. Um, you know, it made me. I was going back on our conversation, and the beautiful thing for me about art is that it'll let you know if it'll pull if your intent is pure. Like my intention behind all this, all the different bodies of work that I made, the intention was always pure. It was to push as hard as I could at that particular time.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, art is going to push you to truth if you're really doing it for real. I feel like if your intent is to really make the purest work that you could possibly make, it'll pull out all the lies. It'll pull out all the fake shit. You know what I'm saying? It'll
Yeah.
pull out it'll make you question, I'd make work and and then I'd ask myself, well, why is this work relevant to you and who you are? What even just aesthetical interest does it have to you?
Mhm.
What more do you have to say? What I would ask myself these questions. And then at the same time, I'm seeing retrospectives for the first time. I'm
Mhm.
traveling, I'm buying books, I'm learning about, oh, this, that, and the third. There's a canon. Oh, I'm educating myself at the same time, but I never thought, oh, not until after this show I made the decision that, hey, I want to just take 2 years off
Oh, nice.
and
Wow.
just be in the studio and like really push as hard as I can in order to make my first um, you know, presentation of a or exhibition of abstract paintings. But before that, I didn't really, yeah, it wasn't a fear for me to be growing and developing in front of people. I just thought, I'm making work. You saw the last show that I'm doing. I'm progressing. I think also too a lot of my favorite shows were retrospective, so I would
Mhm.
see, a lot of accumulation of an artist's kind of life within one exhibition. So I never really kind of thought about it in this kind of like scary way.
Right.
But after this show I said, yo, I really want my next presentation to be pure abstractions.
Interesting seeing this show. I had never seen this show. I, like, had to do some digging. Um, for one, it's crazy that it's at the Lever House. Like,
Yeah.
that's no small thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 2, like, was Richard Prince on your mind at all?
Mm-mm.
Because
No.
like, it was really fascinating to see, like, that's why I had that particular painting up. To me, I could see, like, Matisse, Picasso, Basquiat, like, but also kind of you pushing it into a different place. Like,
Yeah.
this did feel like, okay, I see a voice here. It doesn't
Hmm.
feel like it's just pulling from these things and kind of chopping it up differently.
Right.
Um, and then it made me like, I was trying to find the show, and like, this felt really reminiscent, but this was a year
Hmm.
later. Like,
Yeah.
he hadn't made this work yet. And
Uh-huh.
it was an interesting thing to see where like this kind of gestural sort of semi-figurative abstraction was something that he returned to. But the difference to me is that with Richard Prince, there's always like this irony.
Hmm.
Like, there's a built-in sense of like he believes it and he doesn't at the same time.
Yeah.
And like, in a sense, there was like a moment, like when I was coming up, there was a moment in painting where everything about abstract expressionism was questioned.
Uh-huh.
Where is there such a thing as a pure mark? Like, is there such a thing as pure subjectivity, or is
Right.
it always filtered through ideology or economics or whatever it may be? There are artists that are thinking about that. They're thinking about like Chaney Thompson trying to break down the what the mark
Right.
means, and
Right. Right. Yeah.
Wade Guyton taking the hand out of it altogether.
Hmm.
And it was fascinating to me that when we were talking, that you
Yeah. I
brought
was
up
watching that Wade
you were
Guyton
watching
interview.
Wade's.
Crazy. Yeah.
What's your relationship to an artist like Wade Guyton?
Aesthetically, he speaks to stuff that I'm interested in. Like I'm like, this is to me, this is like that's like futurist painting
Mm,
in a way. But I come from graphic design, so the fact that he's using the Epson printer, I very much so understand Epson and printmaking in that way. Just his book practice is really incredible.
yeah.
I've learned from buying tons of books. I'm very interested in making my own books. I've been lucky enough to make a few. So from a few different sides, I'm interested in him in that way.
Mhm.
Prince, I'm also interested in because he's also an artist who has done different things. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? It's funny that you say that work came like a year after, but I was like, you know, during premonition, I was like heavily invested in that work. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like that's where I was heavily invested at that time.
At that
Yeah,
time,
man.
like we met in 2021,
Hmm.
and I feel like I started hearing your name and I
Hmm.
started seeing the work, and um really the thing that captured me the most was just like your presence, like the way that you are in the world. I was like, okay, that person has like a energy that radiates in a very specific way.
I was blessed.
And so I was like, I I know I know they're cooking. Like I know something's happening there. What I'm curious about in a moment like that where you're shifting so many things in yourself that
Hmm.
you're very clear about,
Hmm.
what does that look like to other people? Like from where you come from to that
Yeah.
particular moment, what is it, how does that environment start to change for you?
Yeah, I used to get all type of remarks from homies, from people that would meet me. I remember I mentioned to you when we were talking about thinking I was like, at one point I was like, man, I hope what are people thinking about the work? I hope they think that my intentions are pure when I'm making this work. I hope nobody thinks I'm just like trying to, oh, this might work. Nah, man. I was like, I was, it's like to go to the Met, I'm gonna go back to that first
Sure.
thing, and then to continue to like unpack, you know, the things that I was seeing and reading about and watching in terms of art. It's just like I was motivated to like I want to have a rigorous studio practice. I want to continue to pay attention to the things that are working within the work that may not be working.
Mhm.
Expand on those things and then continue to push, you know what I'm saying? For my own just for myself, so I can sleep at night. At the end of the day, it's like I need to make the work that I'm the most happy about before anybody else has anything to say. And that's why I made the decision after that last presentation. I said, "Yo, I'm going to take 2 years off. I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to make the best gestural abstract paintings that I can possibly make." And that's what I did, and even from that I found out so much. I learned so much,
Mhm.
so I continue to do that in the studio today. If I'm making work and there's a small thing about the painting that I just finished, the drawings that I made that work, I'm expanding on it. And what happened, what started to happen is I was starting to reference myself and things that were working within the studio to expand, opposed to maybe continuing to look outward, or how am I going to situate myself in the canon, or where do I fit? What do I contribute? And more so just start thinking very insular about what are my real interests,
Mhm.
and that's when the best work started to come, or the work that I feel the most proud of, you know.
In that space of like, you know, of course it's being able to sleep at night is a serious thing. Like that's an important way to live your life, and
Hmm.
it keeps truth in you. But there's also just economic realities too of like if you're if you had success with one particular body of work,
Yeah.
did you get pushback from people in that regard too of like, hey, I see that you're going this way, but like this isn't what we asked for?
Yeah, no, I didn't really get pushed back, I think, in that way. I think it was more so, certain individuals or friends or whatnot would always kind of say, "Oh, like, you're losing your previous audience." I would see on social media, I'd lose followers. I'm saying? Stuff like that. But when you really sit with yourself, does that really mean anything?
Mhm.
Again, art would beg the question of what's true, what's truth, how, you know, visually, what's the closest to truth you can get for yourself. And so I would just, I mean, those things definitely in some way bother me. I'm not going to say that they did not, but, you know, I look back and I'm like, well, I'm glad I kept, continuing to have that kind of interest into pushing,
I mean, I'm glad too, but I'm also the other thing that comes to mind is like the kind of racial dynamic here where it's like, did people feel like, and did you feel like you were moving from black space to white space?
nah, nah. I mean, huh? I didn't feel like that, but I probably got that from other people. I maybe thought
Yeah, yeah.
you're making work that we don't, I don't really grasp.
And I'm not saying that abstraction
Yeah.
is a white space. Of
No.
course, it goes back further
Yeah,
in
come we
black and
so
brown
we
places than
yeah,
anywhere
we
else.
we
So
we did that. I think to an audience that raised me up and held me up, coming from streetwear, coming from culture in that way, right? I had a clothing brand, like, I had a whole, I built an audience from that,
mhm,
and then my interests started to change, and my, I call it maybe a calling started to change, and I really wanted to pursue art and try to make the most, the strongest bodies of work that I could possibly make, and I did lose people in that way, and people might have thought, well, if I remember, I had a homegirl tell me, she was like, she said something on the lines of that, like, oh, like, I don't know what this work is about. I said, well, I mean, from an aesthetical standpoint, you might not be understanding, but the if you read and abstraction painting is, art history is layers to it. It's not just the pictorial
sure.
thing. So, but it's funny now. A lot of those, people are
Coming around.
coming around. Because again, it's a journey.
You're very intentional about your movement. It's not like, "Ooh, let me jump on this," or "Ooh, let me do that."
Nah,
Like
nah.
it's
If I could have, I mean, I could have stayed. I could have stayed where I was at in 2021. I could have maybe stayed where I was at in 2023.
right.
But it's not what it's about, you know. And there's growing pains. I think as my work has gotten, for me, better, things have gotten tougher.
I believe that.
I don't know. I'm really, um, I'm just moved by evolving and growing and digging deeper and you know digging into what excites me in the studio. If there's something that excites me in the studio, I'm going that way.
Mhm.
The show that I had in North Carolina at the Harvey B. Gantt Center was a great exhibition for me. I got that show and I was making the refuge paintings that I was making,
Mhm.
and they were all basically gestural abstract paintings on the pup tents, on the
Right.
military tent shell halves. In the midst of finishing the work for that, by way came the offering paintings. And when I made that first offering, I said, the hell with those refuge paintings. I'm showing straight offering paintings. And to be in the middle of a situation by where someone gives you a show, and you're expected to make this thing, but you got this other thing, it's a thing. But I said it's a thing.
We all follow.
Yeah, but I was like, yo,
You feel me?
luckily I work, you feel me? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Luckily I work with people that believe in what I'm doing, trust me, and had the real conversation, sat down, this is the work that I'm making, this is what I want to do. Maybe I can find a way to bridge it,
Mhm.
and luckily I was able to really think through and find a way to show and stitch together, like, hey, this is where I was at and what I was thinking, but this is where the thought led me.
Mhm.
And that first image that you had up, where the two walls, that was
Right.
the first time I was able to show those paintings. And so, um I'm always gonna make I'm always gonna make the shift, even with T1000. The reason why that show was I decided to just use, iridescent, dark colors like that is because I felt like, hey, I want to be a stronger colorist. How am I gonna do that? Okay, well, you need to, instead of just working with colors that complement one another, you need to actually be able to work with a set few colors or one color. And you need to be able to make paintings with the same amount of intensity that you would get from a saturated picture, but with a muted picture. How can you do that? So I said, okay, I'm gonna make these paintings, and obviously there was an interest in sculpture and steel and the oxidization and all those things, and I made the decision to do it. You know, M- Thinking on the other side of it, first show in Los Angeles, Rob Bennett gave me this opportunity to have this exhibition. It's very risky to kind of go and do a show like that. But again, he was like, this is what this is what you want to do. Okay, bet. There's a Nina Simone clip that I see often, and I reposted it. I've seen it often, but she's like, artists should be reflecting the times.
Sure.
We should be. So I was like, yo, this is where I'm at in the studio with my practice, and I'm seeing where things are going in our current like this is the way for me to tell truth,
Yeah, yeah.
and if people, you know,
The
get
fuck
it,
with it
they
or
get
not.
it. Yeah,
Yeah. It feels like the way you're talking about challenging yourself, it felt very Mamba mentality. Like it's like, oh, this is what I think I'm strong at. Let me see the weakest part of that so
hmm
I can figure out how to get strong there.
yes,
That's an ethic that's not easy to put on yourself. Like I think when you're in school or when you have people that are around you that are like, "Oh, you got to push yourself, you got to do these things." But like when you're alone and by yourself, what are the temptations that are around you where it's
hmm
like, "Oh, you're getting all this praise and accolades and things for doing things in a certain way."
hmm
You can get seduced by that, and like it
yeah,
stops being about the pursuit of what you find to be strong and true, but more so like, all right, this works, let me get this, and let me like, because there's also just very real world
hmm
constraints where it's like I could maybe put a down payment on a house if I
yeah,
stay on this course
yeah,
versus like who the fuck knows what it's going to be.
yeah. At a point, I reached out to a few artists that I was lucky to be able to meet who have been doing it longer than I have, that are older, generation or two older than me, and I actually was asking those questions like, what, I want to do this. This is the work that I'm making. People like this stuff. What do you? It's like, oh, do both. Do both. Make if this is what's working, pump that, and then that can support the other stuff.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, okay. I heard that a few times for a few people. I'm not gonna say no names. I heard that a few times, and I was like, okay. But then it's on you. You also have artists who don't have the exposure at the age that I'm at, that
Mhm.
have I got an opportunity to meet William T. Williams, a goat, you know, and he been banging the boards way far longer than I have.
Yeah.
I got to go to him, funny enough, where the foundry that I used to make the gates, I had been using that foundry for a year, not knowing that I was driving past his crib the whole time.
No way.
So he was like, "Yeah, this is my address." I'm like, "This is literally 10 minutes down the road from where I'm making these gates."
Goddamn. Wow.
So I went to go see him and see his studio, and met his lovely wife, and we had sandwiches. It was great. It was fire. He had the fire set up, the crib, the studio, and I just saw how in he was at the age that he was. But then thinking again on how long he's been doing it. So even for me to have opportunities since 2015 till now to be able to continue to show work, whether it was considered valid or not, make shifts, still have opportunities to show work, have people that still want to back you, believe in the work, help fight. It's like I don't really have much to when I get into those thoughts about like, oh, it's like, what do I really got to complain about?
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? There's artists that have become stewards in a way by where they're teachers and they support their practice by working that, doing that, and then still dialed in on the practice. Like, you know, uh, you know, the when I do get into those moments, I trying to remember that, or I'll look at the peers that I really see who's pushing and enjoy it, and I look at them and I'm like, dang, they doubling down.
Mhm.
Fuck, I can't not double down. I gotta double down. You know what I'm saying? And so there's great artists making, and within the same time that I'm making that, that I also am like, I'm inspired.
Right.
I'm also inspired by the things that I'm doing that that might work. That might be cool to push this that way. I'm inspired by that, but I try not to. That's kind of the thing that keeps me going. And I'm not gonna say it's easy. I have my moments. The person that probably see those moments a lot now is my wife. You know what I'm saying? So
Of course.
she's like, oh, you're being on your Edgar Allan Poe. You're all mopey today. You know what I'm saying? But that's the journey though. Jack Whitten said it the best. They asked him, did he ever want to be the bet like one of the best artists? And he said, I just wanted to be one of the boys. And I was like, that's fucking legend. And I think for me, that's like, it's like if Janice Kunelis, Gilliam, Hammonds, I don't know, uh, Ed Ruscha, you know what I'm saying? If if any of these guys was in the room, you know what I'm saying?
And they tip their hat.
You know, it like is they like, all right, at least at the bare minimum, at least he went for it.
Yeah.
I take that. I'd rather go out swinging than to just be like, you know what, this works. I'm gonna sell 100,000 of these. I'm gonna be, but then what?
I mean, the punches are landing, my friend. So I uh I hope they keep landing, and
Lord willing.
I'm excited to see what transformations happen next. So
Thanks, man.
thank you for this. Thanks for being honest. Thanks for opening up. Thanks for sharing everything.
Nah,
It
thanks for
means a
having
lot to
me.
everybody here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
You mentioned a lot of men that had inspiration on your life and how men have predominantly played a huge part of your education. So I'm wondering, where do women and other artists that don't identify as men fit into your life and practice? Or more
Hmm.
broadly, like what role does women play
Can't
in your
forget,
education?
can't forget the sisters. It's funny. My dang, I didn't name no sisters. I ain't made no women. That's a really good question. My aunt actually took me out painting for the first time. My aunt Trish, she was the first. I guess I could say the first real painter that I met. Didn't have a career, but growing up, always making paintings. My grandmother on my mom's side, she made quilts. Growing up, her quilts was like treasured, like elite quilt maker. Made dolls. Um, I mean, I'm a huge Magdalena Adondo fan. She's a futurist. Like she makes vessels that come from a distant past and a resilient future or something like that. If I could name, so there are sisters that, or women just in general that um, I'm fans of. I mean, Joan Mitchell. You know what I'm saying? Big influence. Lee Krasner. Um, I said Nina Simone before. You know, there's women. You know what I'm saying? That definitely have impact. My mom. You know, my wife. Not to just keep saying bring, but anytime I'm like, she's like, she's highly encouraging on doubling down on, what's strong. But yeah, there's been women that have influence and kind of have impact on, me as an individual, but at the same time, also, work that I've made as well too.
You talked a lot about faith and practice and how that informs your work. You mentioned fashioning these gates, which to me seem like portals or realms that lead to other places. And you're seeking truth throughout your work. Do you feel like when you complete a work, it's an arrival to, or is it a stop to somewhere else in your journey to find truth?
A painting, like you could make the choice to complete a work, or continue to push a work forward, sometimes you have to respect what that work has taught you, or where it's guided you, and then whatever lessons learned from making that, you carry on to the next work. So that's why I say I look at the works in a sense of like timestamps. I definitely think about the gates in terms of being portals, or a way to access the spiritual. Even just working with the gates at T1000 and being at 14 feet, a lot of it was about the physicality of the body, or the carnal, and us wanting to, because we all have spirits. We're all spiritual beings. We just in a fleshly body. So even the distance between the two forms, I wanted there to be enough tension, or enough space with tension, where it felt like you could almost the body almost wants to walk through it, but it's not necessarily enough room for you to pass fully through it. And I think that's, for me, that's like that struggle, or where we're at in terms of just spiritually as people, where we're dealing with things on the carnal level so much, but I think the things that will heal us are closer to the spiritual, and what that battle is going between the two.
One, what are you afraid of when you're in the studio, or does fear even come in to that space?
In terms of things that I'm scared of or fears, the studio is set for you to be fearless. It's just you, you know. The I don't, when I did have that visit with William T, he told me, he was like, your studio practice. He would tell me actually to stop using the word practice. He's like, it's not practice. You're doing it. This is
Word.
It's game time. You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like in terms of the studio, that is where you're supposed to be the most fearless, bro.
Real.
So I try not to carry fear in the studio. What I'm learning now is like how to logistically be able to double down on the things that I believe in terms of how to preserve
That's the next level.
how to preserve the studio. So if anything, I'm like, okay, I sold this work, or I have these funds allocated. How can I take this to move on to do these things? And that's really kind of my biggest. If I'm just being open and honest,
Yeah, yeah.
that's the main fear. And I think that's something that artists don't really talk about amongst each other. How to preserve the studio. It's artists that want to make work, but maybe feel like they can't afford to make the work that they want to make. So how do you bring longevity into that? And the artists that I've
Yeah.
learned to like, they've the reason why they had that longevity is because they figured that out for themselves.
As you're a student, it seems, of trying to understand your own history and things of that sort. Also, this intersection of trying to understand what it means to be an artist. And now I feel like you're a father. Now, one, congrats about being a
Oh,
father
thank you.
and going from being a student to now a teacher every day. You know what I mean? So I'm curious around some of the things that you're valuing less or also valuing more, and also how does that show up in your artwork, or how do you think it's going to show up in your artwork? Because as an African American, as you said, like you're trying to figure out like maybe my people came from West Africa and things of that sort, and debunking history and also like creating it. So I'm just curious, like what's happening for you right now, yeah, on like your values and things of that sort.
Yeah. I mean, one, man, having a daughter, bro. I'm scared, bro.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I'll be looking at her. She got the little pretty eyes. I'm like, dang, she gonna be 20 one day. She gonna. I remember when I was 20. Those things. But in terms of like just what you saying, I mean, I got three younger sisters, and it's different from boys to sons and daughters. I feel like, and so I think for me, I don't know if like this is the thing that me and my wife been talking about. Like, I don't know if I want to do public school. I don't want to know if I want to do private school. Maybe I want to do homeschool. You know, uh,
We can talk about that. I
yeah,
got you.
you know, but also know that there's teachers out. It's just you know what I'm saying. Like but but what I do want to do is give um my baby girl access to as much. Like growing up, history wasn't really a conversation like that. Like it was, and not to fault my parents or anything like that, but just history, where I come from, where we come, like any of that wasn't really a dialogue. And I think now we're in a day by where young younger parents, younger adults now, because we're in the midst, or maybe the end of the somewhere in between the information age, where it's like it's out there. So I just want to give my Lord willing, I have more children, to give them access to as much history as they possibly can, and history before anything. It's cliche as it make people say it. It's like you got to know where you came from to get to where you going, type thing. I really feel like that's a real thing, and art taught me that. From literally from a pictorial in the studio process sense to thinking about myself in terms of an art historical context. Like, I have to know, in order to get to really where I want to go, I got to know what came before me, what's happening now. So even with myself first, I'm like, yo, that's why I got to do my due diligence. It's like I'm not a reader. I really can't stand reading, to be honest. I really can't. But if I'm gonna if I'm really gonna be able to unpack and learn things, and at least give my daughter more than what maybe my parents were able to give me, I gotta maybe do the work that they didn't do, then also share that work with them. Get it, that discourse has to be, had. And then in terms of the work, um, that's gonna peel into the work. Yeah, I think just regardless, anything that is of my interests or things, I'm gonna seep things into the work, at certain points. But yeah, my hope is just to, I'm just get deeper into history.
I want to shout out Primus over there who just asked that question, because he also runs a program called Night School, and you should follow that on Instagram because they are doing their talk on Thursday,
Fire.
where they have 3 speakers get to talk about something that's important to them for 15 minutes. It is a vibe. There's a DJ. It's You got to come early because everybody knows about it now, and
Gets
it's
packed
packed.
out.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Primus is one of the best out there. So shout out to him, and
Nice.
shout out to the grace, presence, and everything that Reggie brought tonight. Thank you so much.
Man, thank you for having me. Thank you to y'all came out too, man. Really appreciate it.